In this lesson, we'll generate our very first fluid and explore the network that's created by the shelf tools when we do so. So I'm going to start with just a clean Houdini scene again here. And we will create a box by control-clicking on the box icon from the Create shelf. And again, the fifth tab over on the right-hand side of the interface at the top is a tab called Particle Fluids. Now we'll make sure that our box is selected in the viewport. Grab our selection tool here, highlight the box. And I'm just going to click on Flip Fluid from Object. So you'll see a few things happen in the interface just right off the bat. First off, our box was replaced with all of these little blue dots. Now, as we learned in the last lesson, these are particles, and these particles just make up the shape of the box. So these are the particles of the particle simulation part of a flip fluid. Okay? Now let's look in the network and see what happened over here in the network. Just going to rearrange the interface a little bit. So we started off with just our box object. And we've been added into the scene here has been a box object 1 fluid, box object 1 fluid interior, and an AutoDOP network. As we know from previous courses, the AutoDOP network is just a regular old Dynamics operator network. It's just called AutoDOP because it was generated when we used a shelf tool. So it was automatically created for us. Also notice that our original box has been hidden. Whenever we use the Flip Fluid from Object Shelf tool, all that Houdini does is look at the shape, the original shape, which we'll turn it back on just for now, which is this box, and it looks at it at that moment when you create the network. However it exists, whatever shape it's in, is exactly the shape that will be created with particles and generated as a fluid. So the original shape is no longer needed, so it's just turned off. The box object 1 fluid basically is the particles that we're seeing that were generated by Houdini. And the box object 1 fluid interior is really just the guts of the fluid. If you had murky water, then you could make this interior cloudy. If you had perfectly clear water, you could even turn this interior off. But basically, these two nodes that are generated here are primarily for rendering the fluid at the final step and for visualizing it here in the viewport. The heart of what happens all happens inside of the AutoDOP network. So let's dive inside there. Let's take a look at our network and what's been generated for us. Well, we'll see here that we have this flip fluid object. And again, now you're starting to see the word flip over and over. Well, this is a flip fluid object. The flip fluid object is plugged into a flip solver. Now the flip solver has multiple little nodes, nodules if you will, up across the top here. These are inputs where you can plug in different things to affect the simulation. To find out what you should plug in there, you can middle mouse click while hovering over one of the little nodules that's lit up. Just middle click, and you'll see that this particular input is looking for something to affect the particle velocity. The next one over, if we middle click and hold, is looking for something to affect the volume velocity. So there it is. Inside the solver, we're seeing that we have the ability to use both particle tools for the particle fluid and the volume or voxel tools that we talked about before. So it's a hybrid system using both particles and volumes. Now this third input, if we middle click, is called sourcing. Sourcing is a little bit different technique for creating fluids, and we'll look at that in the next lesson. But for right now, let's stay focused on our flip fluid object. Now, very simply, you can get things moving. I'm going to just zoom out here on my interface a little bit and hit play. And you'll see that the particles just fall through nothing. Now, it is important to note, too, that we need to have our timeline set to real-time playback. Always when working in Dynamics, you want to have your timeline set to real-time playback. And for more information on that, go back and watch the first couple of lessons in the Introduction to Collisions in Houdini course. There's a really thorough explanation about timeline and how it affects the calculations. But for now, notice that we also have this big blue or purpley blue colored box outside of our particles. And notice that as our particles hit the limits of that box, they disappear. What this purple box is is the limitations of where the fluid can exist. Now keep in mind, this does not mean that the voxel grid exists wherever this blue or purple box is here. This just says this is the limit at which a particle can exist. If a particle comes beyond these walls, just make it disappear. And that's just used for efficiency. So if you have a giant ball of particles and you only need it to exist above the floor, then you could take this box, which is manipulated using the flip solver node. Just make sure that it's highlighted here in the network view. Come over and grab your handle tool. And now you can change the limits of where your simulation exists. So if I wanted it to be shorter, I could just bring it up here like this. I can rewind. And when I hit play, you'll see that my fluids almost immediately disappear because the limit of where they can exist has been raised up to, I'm going to look at the side view here, which I'm doing by doing spacebar and 3. You can also choose a front or side view by highlighting on the little drop-down menu here and do set view, and then pick the front or right viewport, either one. But you can see that I set the limits of my simulation to be actually about halfway through where the particles are. So as soon as I calculate even one frame, those particles beyond the limit disappear. And since gravity is pulling the other particles down, as soon as they get pulled past that limit, they disappear as well. So from this point forward, now I'm going to return back to my perspective view. So from this point forward, there are no particles in our scene because they all exist beyond the limits that we set for our particular simulation. This is really a handy tool to know how to set up these limits. And you'll see a lot more of this in future lessons too. So in the next lesson, let's go ahead and start adding some forces onto our particles so that we can get them moving around and doing some fancy stuff. All right, I'll see you in the next lesson.